Good morning, and welcome to Inside and Out with Patricia Stark. I'm Patricia Stark, joined as always by Lynn Cimetti.
Good morning, everybody.
So we are talking today about what your voice says about you. You may not realize, but your voice doesn't just speak. It speaks volumes about your personality. It speaks volumes about your confidence level. It speaks about your competence level. The way that the world perceives you based on the way that you sound is very much an impactful part of communications.
Which is a little frightening to say, but, you'll have to figure that one out as you go along.
Well, like it or not, people are judged not so much by what they know or what they do, but many times by the way that they sound. A University of California, Los Angeles study found that when it comes to first impressions, visual impact, the way that you look, accounts for 55%. Vocal impact, how you sound, accounts for 38%. And verbal impact, what you say, accounts for just 7%. And on the telephone, it's even more important because the sound of your voice accounts for a full 83% of how people judge you. Is that not a huge number?
That is huge, and you can understand why. I mean, if somebody has nothing to see and only to hear, they will know if you're angry or sad or disappointed or enthusiastic, and that's significant.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when that's all we have to go on, when I coach people to do telephone interviews, whether it's dealing with a reporter or let's say it's a job interview, many times we'll go through a mock situation and I'll say hello to them, and their very first response, they don't realize, is setting the tone for the whole interview. And many times they'll just be like, hello, hi. They'll give a one-word answer. So I will coach them to say, at least give me a line. Set the tone with, hi, how are you today? It's great to be here today. Thanks so much for taking my call, or I look forward to this. That's our first feeling of, okay, is this conversation going to feel like watching paint dry, or is it going to feel like, oh, I'm really excited to talk to this person? And something else, I was listening to someone speak on the radio the other day, and it was somebody that, I think it was a politician, and he obviously was very well versed in what he was saying. He sounded competent. He sounded like he knew what he wanted to say, and he was making sense. But every couple of seconds, he was clearing his throat. And not only is clearing your throat distracting when you're in person, but when you are on the phone or over the radio, it sounds 8,000 times louder. And it ended up making this person actually sound like they weren't confident. It made them sound a little unsure of themselves. And it simply could have been that they were just clearing their throat. So I'll coach people that before you get on the phone, before you make that call, that is not the time to clear your throat. I heard somebody do it the other day when they got on the phone doing a sales call with somebody, and they said they started to answer a question, and they went, well, let me tell you this. It's like, do not clear your throat into the phone or into the microphone because it sounds so much louder.
I would imagine that any noise like that, the ruffling, especially on the phone, ruffling of papers, or distractions of doors closing, all those kind of things, especially if you're doing something that's professional on a phone call.
Right. I mean, it's all we've got. All we've got is the audio. So how you use your voice can make people view you as confident, trustworthy, likable, or the opposite. It can sound insecure, weak, boring, even sometimes dishonest. And there were some studies also that asked people, what do you find most irritating in an unpleasant voice? What's most annoying? And the number one answers were people who sound like they're whining, people who sound complaining or nagging, high-pitched or squeaky voice, loud or grating voice, a mumbler, very fast talkers, a weak and wimpy voice, and a flat monotone voice, or sometimes a thick accent. There's nothing wrong with having an accent and taking pride in your culture and where you're from, but you need to be understood. And when I work with people that have accents, I'll tell them, look, you got to slow down, and you can't let your words blend together. In normal human conversation, we do something that's called blending, so that we don't sound like we're talking like a robot or staccato. So what happens is those words tend to kind of blob together in normal conversation, and And if it's not your language or your accent that you're used to hearing, it's going to be that much harder to decipher what someone is saying. So that's very important to make sure that you're not letting that blending happen and that you're going a little bit slower. And mumbling is also something that was on the list as far as really driving people crazy. And it's simply because you're not opening your mouth fully. You're not letting the words get out of your mouth. And we're going to be having a wonderful guest on the show today. Her name is Patrice Pickering. Patrice has been on Broadway and Phantom of the Opera. She's been on television and radio. She's done all kind of wonderful things. And now she actually coaches people in her studio in Blauvelt. And she helps a lot of young people with their voice. She trains them for vocal quality. She trains them for singing. She trains them for performance. And she's going to be talking to us today about how can we make our voice sound more confident? How can we use our voice and have more control over our voice? And perhaps if you sound nasal, what types of tips and techniques can we use to not sound like a Fran Drescher kind of voice or not mumble? And how to speak from a deeper place? How to sound more in control, whether you're on the phone or whether you have to give a speech or you have to get up in front of people at work or even just deal with a contractor over the phone. How can you get what you want by sounding like you're more in charge with your own voice?
Well, I've been with you for a long time, so I've seen you work with people on areas like that. But I believe that most people, or many people, don't realize that there are things that they can actually do to the intonation and their voice if they're really unhappy with the way they sound. I mean, you hear that all the time. Whenever somebody hears themselves recorded, they're saying, I don't sound like that. Because it's so shocking to yourself. You don't really hear yourself the same way. But at the same time, there are things that I've seen you help people work through that I don't think many people know you can make changes.
Yeah, you're not stuck with your voice like your shoe size. You can do something about it and not have to squeeze into something that doesn't fit. It is true. We certainly have things in our DNA that affect our voice. That's why people who are related to each other sound like each other. Women's vocal cords are shaped differently than men's, and hormones like testosterone and different things affect high pitch and low pitch and you name it. But many times no one's ever been told that they can do something about it. Or you'll hear people say, well, slow down, don't speak so fast, but they don't tell them how to slow down, how to do that. So certainly you can start thinking of different techniques and tips where you can lower your register and learn how to slow down, learn how to use pauses. And Patrice is going to go over a whole menu of different items that we can use that will help make us sound more confident, especially in this economy, in this job environment right now. Phone interviews have become really prevalent. More and more people are over the phone now being interviewed first, many times, multiple times before they actually are seen in person.
That's so true. And I believe Patrice is on the phone with us.
Patrice Pickering, good morning.
Good morning, Patricia. How are you?
Good. We're doing great. Joining me is Lynn. Say hi to Lynn as well.
Hi, Lynn. How are you?
Good morning, Patrice.
So, Patrice, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
So you have really a wonderful, varied background working on Broadway, working in television, and now you help people to find their voice. You're a vocal coach. Tell us a little bit about what you do, Patrice.
Well, I'm a vocal teacher, and I live in Blauvelt. I work with a variety of age groups, but primarily children. There's a lot of interest in this area in music theater, which is what my background is, although I was trained as an opera singer. So I feel that I've had very good vocal training. And that's what I'm trying to do with the kids that are here, give them an idea about how to use their air, how to use their voice, how not to hurt themselves, and to let them take part in some of the musicals that are done in this area. There are many children's theaters around here, and the kids just love it. And I think that the better training that they have, the better that they will be able to sustain their vocal quality through high school and hopefully into college.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, and one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the program today is because I know that there's a lot of similarities between how we use our voice for singing and performing and how we might use it for presentations, public speaking, just using our voice over the phone. So we wanted to try to get some tips and some tricks from you today about how people can better do that. And I'm sure with your dealing with performers and young people that you're also dealing with competence issues, them trying to find their voice, taking chances, taking risks, and then, belting out this amazing song. There's a lot of components to that. So the first question that I think would be most interesting to our listeners is it possible, Patrice, to change our voice? If we do have some bad habits, if we are nasal, if we're not using our voice correctly, I'm assuming that there are things that anybody can do to improve their vocal quality.
Absolutely. In fact, just about anybody's voice can be improved. Many people come in with gorgeous, God-given talents. But people come in who don't have a gorgeous, God-given talent. But they can improve so much. There's so much to think about in terms of breathing, in terms of vocal tone, vocal quality, and just the technique of learning how to use your instrument to its fullest.
And I think a lot of people don't think of their voice as an instrument. They just don't pay attention to it. Many times they haven't heard it. They're not listening to their voicemail when they send it, or they're not recording themselves, so they really don't have any idea. So what's some of the first things that you'll recommend to somebody for them to just even get comfortable and learn about their own voice?
Well, I think that the biggest problem that people have is that the minute, and I've heard you cover this topic before, the minute you are asked to sing or speak in public, nerves take over.
Right.
And I think that the important thing is to have things to concentrate on to help you through that initial, oh my God, I'm going to die now, feeling that you have when you're asked to sing or speak.
So what would those things be?
One of the things that I think is really important is knowing how to breathe. The majority of people will respond to the question, would you please take a deep breath for me, by lifting their shoulders right up to their ears. And if you sit there in your chair right now and do that, I want you to see how much tension there is with your right around your shoulders and your neck.
Yeah, it's terrible. This is where I go when I'm stressed out.
Exactly. So I try to get them to relax. I try to get them to take a deep breath. It is easier, especially with kids, it's easier to say to them, fill your lungs up like balloons, instead of saying, take a deep breath. The minute you say take a deep breath, up go the shoulders.
Right.
But if you can get them to picture their lungs as balloons and say, fill your lungs up like balloons, what happens is they start to take a lower, slower breath, and they actually then do get a deep breath. The majority of us take a very shallow little breath in order to speak, and we use like a seventh of our lung power. When you take a low, slow breath, you fill your entire lung. Mm-hmm. When you start to talk, if you can stay expanded like that for as long as possible and let a little stream of air out at a time, that's enough to talk and that's enough to sing, but it's not extra air escaping, and it lets you use a longer phrase without running out of breath.
And doesn't that also, by doing that, Patrice, help with your heart rate and your blood pressure? Doesn't that start to level everything out?
This is one of the things that I ask kids to do. When they hear their introduction, and the majority of the time when you are speaking or singing, you either have someone introducing you, right, or you have a piano introduction,
yeah,
with your music. The minute you hear your introduction, don't listen to it. You know about you. You don't need to hear your introduction. Start that as your starting point for taking your breath and for beginning to fill your lungs up like balloons. And it's amazing how much that calms people down.
Great. That's a really good tip. So now, one common problem that I deal with a lot is a nasal voice, especially in the New York area. Sometimes we tend to sound like Fran Drescher. We tend to get locked up in our nose, and this affects
Absolutely.
women more than men. But what I've seen from working with them, it just seems like they're speaking from that nasal area, from the sinus area or up in their throat. They're not speaking from a deeper place. How do you address nasal talkers?
There are some very easy things that you can do, some things that you can really think about that will help with that. For example, when when your voice comes out of your vocal cords, if you heard that sound, it sounds like the sound you get when you blow up a balloon and then pull on the edges.
Yes.
That's the actual sound that comes out of our vocal cords. So what we have to do is pitch that sound into our resonating cavities. And those are your sinuses, your nasal cavity, and your bone structure. But there's a really important one, and that's your mouth. You cannot change the size of your sinus cavities. You can't change the size of your nasal passage, but you can make more space inside your mouth. When you do that, for example, if I'm talking like this, it's a very nasal sound.
Yes.
What I'm doing is letting my soft palate in the back of my throat sit right down against my tongue. If I lift my soft palate, and you can actually hear it happening, and I'm supporting with my air, that will pitch my voice into my face, but it will make more space in the back of my throat, and it alleviates that nasal sound.
And you had told me one time, along with that, you had recommended saying the word mood. Tell our listeners about reciting mood over and over.
Well, that ooh sound is a very when you use the vowel ooh, it naturally gives you the most space in the back of any of the vowels. So the ooh will open up the back. But there are some other images that are terrific for feeling that. And one of them is the very beginning of a yawn. When you start to yawn, it puts everything in the right position in the back of your throat. Your tongue starts to drop down a little bit. Your soft palate lifts. And I'm not talking about when you get further into a yawn, because then that causes some tension. But it's just at the very beginning. And if you try it right now, if you sit there and just start to yawn, now we'll have a yawn fest.
Everybody's yawning in the studio right now.
But you can feel, do you feel
Yes.
everything opening in the back?
Yes, it does open up. One thing I want you to just define a little bit clearer is I don't know if everybody will know what you mean when you say soft palate. Can you define that a little bit further?
Yeah, that's that little piece of skin that hangs down in the back of your throat. That's called the uvula.
Oh, with a punching bag.
That's your soft palate. And if you feel back along the roof of your mouth, you'll feel your hard palate, and
Yes.
beyond that, it gets a little bit soft. That's what I'm talking about.
Good.
And when divers have to clear their ears and blow into their nose, that's what happens. That lifts. But if you think about yawning in the back, that will give you that feeling of that lifted soft palate. The other thing that I love for an image, especially for the younger kids, if you think about having a piece of very hot baked potato on the back of your tongue,
Yes.
you would immediately lift away from that so that you wouldn't burn your mouth.
That's a good one.
And the other one that's good is if you think about somebody surprising you for your birthday with a huge room full of people, and you walk in and they yell surprise, and you go, it's a happy surprise. There's almost a smile in the back.
Yes.
But it also opens everything up.
Okay, so these are all good ways to open up so that we're not speaking from our nasal area.
Exactly, and the trick is when you take you're going to fill your lungs up with like balloons. You're going to take in that air, and as you're taking in your air through your mouth and your nose, you're feeling that lifting sensation in the back, so that by the time you start to sing or speak, you're already in the right position in the back of your throat.
Very good. So one of the things that we've been talking about today is the fact that with this economy and a lot of people out there on the hunt for a job, there's a lot more prevalence of phone interviews. People are, I'm coaching them, it's more frequent than I've ever seen. What are some ways that you think that people can sound more confident over the phone with the way that they use their voice? If they're soft-spoken, how can they project? How can they take better charge of coming across? And they may be nervous. They may not be 100% confident if they're feeling like they're being judged, or they're hoping and they're really in maybe dire straits to try to get a job, or they're putting this pressure on themselves. Give us some tips to help some of our listeners come across more confident and sturdy sounding when they're on the phone in an interview.
Well, I think the most important thing is that when people are nervous, they rush. And I find this, I coach acting scenes, and I'll find that the kids who have prepared songs are in wonderful shape with their song. But the minute they have to speak, they start to rush.
Yeah.
And I think that it's all tied together if you remember and you try very hard to take slow, low, deep breaths. It helps you slow down that rate of speech. It also gives you a chance to think in between your sentences.
Yes.
People will take a deep breath and then they start off like a horse race, and they don't punctuate their sentences. They don't stop to think in between. I mean, you know yourself, if we're having a conversation, it isn't just one person speaking an entire paragraph and never stopping.
Right.
Hopefully, you're editing what you're saying as you're going along, and you're coming up with an idea, and then you pause. That's the chance to relax and take another deep breath and think and continue on with your sentence.
Yes.
That also helps you to be animated. And I think maybe with a phone interview, that's one of the other important things. I think it's very easy to come across in a monotone when you're speaking on the phone. You're not talking to a person, and I think you have to make a conscious effort to vary the pitch of your voice and to be very animated yourself while you're speaking. And even looking in a mirror while you're speaking on the phone, it's like having a conversation with a person.
Yeah, you really have to picture who's on the other end of that phone. And I also advise people to stand up. They have a better energy. I know a lot of voiceover performers, and when I've done voiceovers, we tend to stand more so that we're not crushing that diaphragm, that our breathing and energy is better.
Definitely, because the more I'm walking around while I'm talking to you.
Good.
But that keeps the body in line, and it makes it easier to breathe.
Right, very good. And how about some techniques that we can use to just warm up our voice ahead of time so that we're not clearing our throat in front of a microphone or when we raise our hand or when we go to speak? What are some things that we can do to warm up before any kind of communication is where we're going to have to be using our voice?
There are some very good things. One of my favorites is the fire siren, where you start at a comfortably low pitch. You're not going to push beyond your comfort zone in terms of range. You're not going to start way below where it's comfortable or try to go way higher than it's comfortable. But you're just in a comfortable range. You're going to start with an ooh sound, and you're going to just sound like a fire engine. Ooh. And that exercises your whole range. It hits all the pitches.
So we just don't want to do this while walking down the sidewalk because people might think that we're a little nuts.
Exactly. We're hoping that you can find a little private room to warm up in, or do it before you leave the house.
Or in the car.
Exactly. I've missed many exits because I was warming up on my way to an audition.
Oh, I wish I could have been videotaping that, Patrice.
I can't tell you. The other one that I really like is it's a yawn and a sigh kind of an exercise. You start to yawn, and as you yawn, you lift your arms way up over your head, and then you sigh, and you drop your arms, and you drop your torso all the way down to touch the floor. So it's... And if you do that, you'll notice that puts your throat in that lifted position in the back, that lifts your soft palate when you sigh. And you can do that.
I would think that would also release some tension from your body if you're nervous.
Totally. It's a wonderful stress reliever.
Excellent.
You can't obviously do that in the car. But the other thing that I think is something to keep in mind physical exercise, any kind of physical exercise, warms up your body, and your throat's part of your body. So when I was in college, I had 2 voice lessons a week. One of them was after a dance class. The other one was not. The other one was right out of bed.
Yeah.
The one after the dance class was always better, and that's because I was very warmed up. Even though I hadn't sung a note, it was everything was much more warmed up.
Interesting.
Anything that you can do that starts buzzing and vibrating in your face, humming is a good way to warm up your voice. And the other one that I love is buzzing your lips. If you, over a series of pitches. If you do, first of all, you can't do that if you're not supporting well. So it gets your support going, and it also warms up your voice, and it also warms up your lips, and it gets your face. It makes it easier to articulate. You have to move your lips when you're giving a speech or when you're singing, or then we just don't understand you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice, because I think that sometimes when we're nervous and we're worrying about what we're going to look like, we tense our face, we tense our jaw, we do all of these tension things right before we go out there. So this is going to work double duty and really help warm up our voice, relax our face, relax our body. All of these tips are really terrific, Patrice. We so much appreciate you joining us today. And just before I let you go, just give me 3 things that we shouldn't do before. I know that some people say avoid dairy because it gets our tongue coated, not too much caffeine so we don't speak too fast. Any others that come to mind?
Don't smoke.
Yes.
I mean, smoking, obviously is bad. The thing that I find that people have the most problem with, and especially in this day and age, is trying to talk over loud speaking or loud music. It's really a killer for the voice. If you try to match that volume, the first thing you know, you're using the muscles in your throat, you're feeling hoarse, and it's just, you have to learn as a speaker or a singer, that's what you do. That's what your job is. So what goes along with that is giving up some of the fun things like partying, or making lots of noise at parties and games. You have to learn to stamp your feet and clap your hands and wave your arms in the air and not use your voice.
Right. So if you've got a speech coming up or you've got a phone interview or something, take care of your voice. Make sure that you're not using it, overusing it too much ahead of time. So that's
right.
Really good advice as well. So Patrice Pickering, we thank you so much. Great advice today. And, good luck in all of your coaching. Patrice is located in Blauvelt. If anybody is interested, do you have a website or anything that you'd like to give out, Patrice?
I do. It's Patrice Pickering at .com, and there's information on there about my studio.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time again. We really appreciate it. Great tips.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. So one of the things I think that is really important that we touched on earlier is to get familiar with your voice. It's not good enough to just say, I hate the way that I sound, I don't want to listen to myself, because every day you're using your voice. And every day, the way that you use your voice is affecting how people respond to you and how they feel about you and how they think that you feel about yourself. So anybody now with a cell phone or a digital recorder, it doesn't have to be professionally done. You don't have to videotape yourself. Just start playing with recording your voice and listening to it back again and saying, do I sound nasal? Do I sound rushed? Do I sound any way that it sounds not good to you? But I think that there's something very empowering about getting used to your voice, getting familiar with it, and getting to like it, and enjoying and saying it doesn't sound foreign to me. If your voice sounds foreign to you, you really need to do this. And start to notice how you leave messages. Many times when you leave a message on someone's voicemail, it will give the option to review it. And then you can say, I want to re-record or I want to send. So that's a good habit to get into. Record it and then hit that option so that you can listen to it back again and say, do I like the way that I sound? Do I sound confident? Do I sound like I'm in control, or do I sound rushed, or am I hard to understand? And then re-record it again. And it's the same thing with your outgoing message on your voicemail. Sometimes depending on what's going on or what mood I'm in or how I'm feeling that day, I may record my outgoing message several times times before I settle on one that I'm going to say, okay, that's a keeper. So we want to do things that are going to make us comfortable and really help us to be familiar and own our voice. And then once we are familiar with it and take ownership and responsibility for it, then we can start to make little changes here and there, and you don't have to go from A to Z. You don't have to all of a sudden go from being a soft talker or a nasal talker to all of a sudden sounding like you're phenomenal. It's a process. So every time, just play with a little bit more. I coach people for when they're on camera, and I say, actually, what you do outside and what you do with your family and friends is going to affect your performance. So start noticing how you're ordering coffee at the deli or how you're interacting with people. And that's where you start to input some of these things when you try to speak a little slower and use pauses and speak from your diaphragm. Do it before you're in the situation, before you think that you're going to need it on that interview on the phone. Start playing with it ahead of time and ask people to give you feedback and start listening, and then you'll be getting better and it will be making progress before you actually need to use it in a situation where it counts even more.
Well, it's particularly important, especially with these kids who are coming out of college, going to interviews, that type of thing. I think that's really key for them, that they kind of, and they can easily do it on their cell phones and have an idea of what they sound like and make sure when they leave a message they sound clear and concise.
Absolutely. And like Patrice said, it is an instrument, and if it's your instrument, why not get as good at it as possible? Good. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us on Inside and Out today. Thank you, Lynn. And we will see you next week with more tips on communicating with confidence. Take care.